Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this month's BookBlast Translation Book Club, in which we're discussing Fathers and Fugitives by S.J. Naude, translated by Michiel Heyns, published by Europa Editions. For those of you who haven't managed to find time to read the book or all of it, in brief, Fathers and Fugitives follows Daniel, a gay journalist in London, who becomes involved with a Serbian couple after meeting them at Tate Modern. What begins as a casual, sexually charged three-way relationship evolves into a one-sided financial arrangement, with Daniel buying them food, cigarettes and opera tickets. The pair vanishes, but then they also reappear, and then they go to South Germany, and there's very odd things going on in a campsite, and then they end up in Belgrade, when Daniel, he lives in the flat with them, and then it all ends actually horribly tragedy because the pair commit suicide. They had been doing some kind of financial fraud, money laundering. And then the second part of the novel shifts. So he actually goes to South Africa, which is where he comes from, his birthplace, and his father is dying. The very cold sister, obsessed with her family, has abandoned everybody. So it's very moving, all that part with Daniel looking after his father. But again, there's a lot of odd disconnect, miscommunication, no communication, loneliness. It's very interesting. There's all emptinesses in this text. After his father dies, Daniel inherits 50% of the estate will come to him, and he has to spend time with his cousin Theon, and he is on a lonely farm in the Free State. So you have the contrast between the big city, big light, bright lights, and then the rather abandoned grasslands, farmlands. And Theon is looking after a young boy with cancer, who's the son of one of his labourers, and they all live together in the house. That's the one warmth, actually. They're all living together. And then Theon and Daniel and the little boy all go to Japan for miracle treatment, which fails. So Daniel returns to the UK, Theon goes back to South Africa, and then that seems to be it, but it's not, because then Theon emails Daniel and suggests that he comes to South Africa, and actually Daniel agrees, and they shack up together. And then there's this rather odd drifter who goes to all these gigs and concerts and obviously drops acid. Anyway, ends on a very sad note. Beautifully written, very strong, very odd, and it did that awful cliche haunt. Now, who would like to kick off?
I think because it's written in close third omniscient, so it's almost like James Joyce's Free and Direct Discourse, where it's written and then it's almost as if the omniscient narrator is actually sharing the same thoughts as the protagonist. So that's what I found quite difficult, because you almost felt complicit in the terrible things that he was experiencing. And it's interesting that it didn't just stop when Daniel was no longer the main sort of lens through which we experienced the world of the novel. It carried on when, is it Heyns?
Heyns, the drifter.
Yeah, and I was like, firstly, where on earth did this person come from?
Yeah. But I mean,
I was hoping for some respite, but there was none. But no, it's almost as if you were complicit in these like terrible thoughts, and you shared in them, and then you felt a bit dirty.
I suppose I did. I found it readable. I found it a bit gloomy, to say the least.
Yes, I'm sorry. It's not the best thing to read on a grey February day.
Well, every chapter's going to end in death. Very big on death.
Yeah, he is very big on death. It's obviously not just.
I don't know hopefully if somebody else knows a bit more about him, if he's, if that's something in his other books. Yeah, you mentioned this thing about loneliness, and that was actually, actually that's interesting. So the end of the word, hide, is the name of, sounds like pine, but anyway. I suppose on the point as well you made about this kind of mixing of black and white on the farm, I was trying to think of any kind of parallel, and one it did remind me of, I don't know if anyone's read Lee Turgenev, but there's stuff in his books about these sort of middle farmers who, after the freeing of the serfs, sort of try and reorganise their farms and are not particularly successful. And obviously the young people want to get out there and go to the city. So I also kind of wondered, is this a bit kind of utopian as well? Is this sort of, although it wasn't, it's not describing a very happy circumstance, because this guy was really ill, the people on the farm looked after him and kind of gave him the farm. I suppose it seemed kind of a little bit wishful thinking in all the gloom, but that was his. But it was realistic in one way, because he said, well, when I go to the town, nobody talks to me because I've let the side down.
We
Yeah.
see he's a sort of good guy. There were terrible stories about farms,
Oh, yeah,
the
fine,
owners behaving appallingly, and you know, so he was being quite a nice collectivist community kind of person, rather
Yeah.
than
Oh yeah, I mean, I've seen these
behaving, which is
photographs of
that was one of the more positive things, I think.
I don't know if you've seen these photographs of South Africa where there are like towns where literally, you know, apartheid's gone, but you know, like you can see it's like there's lines where all the houses on one side are nice and all the houses on. It's not. I mean, it's so this. That's what made me think. Oh, is this kind of like a bit of wishful thinking about the way
Maybe, yeah.
things could be?
Yeah, because you have to like interrogate Theon's motives behind, you know, welcoming the family onto the farm. Like, it wasn't out of goodness of his heart. It was guilt because, you know, the boy was ill and everything else. And he didn't even, for example, when Daniel came to the farm, he didn't introduce the people to him. You know, the people had no agency there. They were just almost background characters.
The farm had once seen better days and therefore could support everyone.
Yeah.
And it was all sort of going downhill.
The language, beautifully written, beautifully translated. I was wondering why did he even write it in Afrikaans, because it could have been quite nicely done in English. It's certainly a very bleak book. It's certainly, you know, sort of Daniel comes as a lost, lonely person, a child, who right from the beginning, his relationship with his mother was very strong, but then his mother died. And his relationship with the father and the sister just non-existent. And there is actually a guy who's completely lost in the world, if I use the word, because he finds this very, you know, sort of a dodgy character to get involved with. For whatever reason, whether he's a, you know, sort of a quick fix in sexual activity,
Of the two men,
or he was really chasing. When he meets the German fellow in the Tate Gallery, and he speaks very fondly with him. They have a nice weekend, and suddenly he abandons him. So he actually is Daniel is a sad character throughout, and he's totally lost in this.
Totally lost,
you know,
exactly.
in the world, and he tries to figure out for himself by going, you know, sort of looking after his father. His mission was to tell his father everything, to actually ask him to listen to, because his father never ever, and it's throughout that, you know, sort of a third part or the second, whatever. I think is the second part, is actually father always interrupted him. He never allowed him to finish his sentence, and he's really quite, I mean, I would call it a damaged child, psychologically damaged, and he's totally lost everywhere. And certainly meeting his cousin first time in a farm, father was really a domineering, you know, sort of domineering person. He was, you know, sort of a really, you know, sort of from the African, and everything white was fine, and everything rich as well. And he undermines.
Yeah, and the mother had come from the farm and all of that.
And
So he'd
you know,
obviously,
sort of he really, you know, sort of but it's so well, you know, sort of described here. And this father who really, you know, sort of, I mean, I would never look after a father like
there's
that.
that bit when he goes out in the boat after the father dies.
Yes, you know,
And he's just flirting with death, the big tanker and you think, is he actually going to kill himself, or is he just flirting with death, or is he, what's he doing?
You know, sort of, I mean, his whole, you know, sort of lost actually here is that he did not, the father did not allow him to speak about the
He's
two
crushed.
sons.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is when he drives him up the hill in a scorching, you know, sunny weather, he gets his own back. And his
that
father
walk,
to
the
sit down.
exhausting walk to the top of the hill and down again.
Yes,
That's right.
you know, but he sort of said, now I'm dictating you, and it's no longer, you know, sort of, you are not in a power. So it's really, I mean, throughout the book, you know, sort of, I haven't finished, you know, sort of the last bit.
Can I speak? I agree with you. I really like the son-father dynamic, and like the character of Daniel. And actually, as a sort of close third-person narrator, we kind of read the book through the third-person narrator, but we really hear his voice. So I thought that the voice was quite detached, like emotionally detached, not very in touch with the emotional experiences. And I thought that it also comes from that sort of detachment from your own life and being lost and disoriented. And I was really touched by some of the moments with the father, with the mother, with the family. But then I think whenever they went to Japan, that kind of, I was a bit lost there. I felt like, why did it have to be in Japan? Again, like that question of like globalism. I actually would prefer the novel then would just stay in South Africa.
That's true, yeah. It's the medical stuff, isn't it?
But it was medical, but also the cousin that wanted to go.
The cousin wanted to
Japan.
go.
And, you know, so the kind of Theon had a, you know, sort of an obligation because the
To
mother
get his will,
accused-
to get his share.
But why Japan?
Because actually the Japan, you know, so in Japan, this particular clinic in Tokyo
That's
that
really
run potential, because the child had incurable blood disease, and that was it. But in
Yeah.
I
Japan, in
understand
Tokyo,
that. But that doesn't felt odd still.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, you felt
I'm in a
it felt like a
medical
plot contrived
exactly,
with plotting.
exactly.
It's a bit extreme.
Tiny also wants to go to Japan.
Yeah.
And I think I made a note. I was like, why does everyone want to?
It feels like a bit like a plot device.
well,
Then what
that did not bother me at all because I'm in a medical, or was in a medical profession or healthcare profession, and you go where the treatment is possibly, you know, I mean, it's still research, it's still, you know, experimental, but I know, you know, sort of a number of friends, they've gone to the world to get treated. To me, that did not actually, you know, sort of at all made a difference, you know.
But what did you think of the one thing that foxed me, it didn't quite work, is why Hein took that little baby. But that, I thought, why on earth is this drifter who's off his head and go to rock concerts and then Shelley dumps him because he's just such a loser, really? Why on earth did he take the baby? I mean, that wasn't clear, the motivation, or did he have it in for the gay? Well, because also there was that subtle thing about something may have happened between Theon and the father. So there's this whole slightly the male, the whole what is masculine, what is. You wonder about him and his motivations, and all of them.
Father relationship, I can't see any tenderness and care there either.
Well, the father was a bit of a cold fish too.
Pure torture. A man who cannot remember, who cannot understand, and he's rejoicing, telling him all the minute detail of what he knows
The father will hate, I know. This is
will
revenge.
hate.
Yeah.
And he's thinking about what is getting next. And it's
No, but
He's not lucid, is he? When he's being told these things, he can't remember them because
he's losing it.
yeah,
So
so it's like he's trying to
He's
avoid
world.
culpability for his actions
Well,
by
I
telling his
wouldn't
father when he's
actually.
not.
Something. I know that the phrase that he said was horrible, but actually the way I read the Serbian part was that they're in some sort of a weird codependent relation. Actually, Daniel as well is kind of entrapped in that codependent relationship himself. He cannot leave. This is why like he kind of keeps going to Germany. He keeps going to Belgrade because it's almost like he's entrapped as well in that dynamic.
Two Serbian guys, you know, sort of, very dodgy characters and very, you know, sort of manipulative, and they're there to get. I mean, almost they, you know, sort of entrap Daniel.
I agree because the third person, like the close third, it makes you share in Daniel's like prejudice towards a Serbian.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then you're wondering, is this something the author feels himself against Serbians?
No,
Yeah.
I don't think so. Daniel feels prejudice against the Serbs. Otherwise, he would not actually. He actually likes them.
But I think it's
And
unconscious prejudice because he uses phrase like their onslaughts are rougher. And it's like they're associated with vulgarity and violence.
But they were vulgar. They were violent. You know, they actually leave Serbia. I mean, they're laundering money. They're, you know, in a corrupt bank, and everything is. What actually they're saying to Daniel when they move into his apartment.
Yeah.
Before anything, you know, sort of right away, and they move into Daniel's, and basically, you know, sort of scrounge on him. But you know what is happening is the guy, which is true in the Balkans, you know, sort of a homosexuality is not
it's not.
recognized.
No.
It's not actually. It's condemned, and it's.
And the mother's furious. Don't forget, he gets attacked by the mother
Yes.
of one of the Serbs.
Yeah.
Doesn't she have a go at him?
And I think in the sort of the Free State, in those smaller towns, I think it's more.
culturally it's still taboo.
Even if something's legal, it takes a long time for people to accept. Whereas Japan, he has a jolly old time in Tokyo's.
Yes,
You think there he can go for it.
What they do, they just go to the clubs.
I know, I
When
thought that was a
The child
bit-
is there and the doctor. Why is there no connection between that?
I would like to say that even I didn't completely enjoy.
It was
I
amazing.
felt like I've learned something for sure, and like I felt like it was like a good sort of example of like a very fragmented narrative and very incomplete arcs of narrative. And I actually read in a review that it was almost like it was probably intentional.
Intentional.
I really
Yeah.
hope
The
it was.
disjointed. I think it was.
To
It
create that
just
sort of a feeling of like being haunted by this incompleteness.
And it made me think quickly on a structural level. I was wondering if the sort of the contained pentality of the 5 chapters linked in with
Yeah.
Theon's obsession with the seasons in Japan.
Exactly, because yes, he's
Whether
very
they were
keen on
fragments.
the nature. Yeah.
Because they were all like not all set in
Mhm.
different countries and continents, but it did feel a bit like that.
But I think for me personally that
Here we
structure,
are.
even though I can appreciate like why it has been it has been done this way, for me personally I didn't particularly enjoy it. I think I prefer narratives would have like less sort of threads and like just kind of going a bit more deeply in one thread.
Yeah.
Kinta used to be famous for the sort of disconnect, the silence, the gap, the people not communicating, and the sort of, for some reason, that again, the bleakness, sort of relate. But this really does rather take the biscuit.
I guess the only thing
Yeah.
for me that connects them really is that, not to be too on the nose with the title, but they're all fugitives from their
From
fathers.
some- yeah.
Yeah.
All from their
Yeah.
fathers who are all like either abandoned them, or disapprove of them. And I think that's why all 3 of these male characters, these white male characters, may I add, want to have that baby. Daniel probably thinks the same thing. Raise a child the right way to prove themselves that they are not their own fathers.
Translated by
Michiel Heyns.
He
Also
also
right.
himself.
Yeah.
Himself, yeah.
Lots of really good stories there, understand. Not that was
Yeah.
some. Earlier works by Naude, he was writing in both in Afrikaans and in English. So that's interesting how that works for him. How is his English, and it could have been quite interesting to read.
Well, I saw the author on YouTube.
Yeah.
He was interviewed regarding this book. His English was impeccable because he, sort of certainly educated here, worked here, sort of in America. So he is actually, sort of extremely, very well
Articulate,
spoken, very articulate.
I suppose if Afrikaans is his original language, but I mean, maybe it was an experiment. Sometimes writers do that; they experiment.
I think this is hugely speculative, but
Mm.
do you think perhaps he wrote this in Afrikaans because it's such an Afrikaans book?
Because it is a very
Do
home.
you think he feared criticism? They're like, oh, why did you write this in English when you have the ability to write in
That's true.
Afrikaans? Like a
True.
sort of political kind of.
Yeah,
That's
I
true.
would say
Yeah.
I think so too, because I think it's valid enough that it was written in Afrikaans. I think
Yeah.
the question about why didn't he write in English? Well, why?
Why not? Yeah, why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
Why? Yeah.
Why should he have to?
Why should he?
Why should he have
to?
to?
Important literature.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
then it becomes literature translation, whereas it's Afrikaans literature. Like,
Yeah.
Thinking about
Yeah.
this book, I wrote down what sort of picture of homosexuality, the gay male experience, does this book create? And I wondered if anyone had any thoughts on that.
So many pickups that there was almost, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but whenever I was reading about Daniel and Theon, I at some point almost had a feeling that they're gonna like get
Are they
together.
gonna get it
Well, I
together?
thought
Yeah.
actually-
There's
Yeah.
like the sort of like a tension in this. And I was
Absolutely.
like, oh my god, is this gonna happen?
But
Yeah.
Theon actually was in love as a youngster,
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
That's when they
Daniel,
first met,
went
yeah.
then first.
Yeah.
And he would have done the world, and Daniel just completely
Goes off. That I thought was rather well done. What's not allowed, the father marries. There's that whole what is and isn't allowed and the taboo thing. But it's also you hate the father. It would have been he probably hated that part of himself. He would have been ashamed of it.
Yeah.
It'd be a shame, which actually there's nothing to be ashamed.
That's the disconnect within us. He's disconnected with himself.
Mm.
And it doesn't sound like Theon's father from the letter was going to stop it either. It
No.
sounds like he's not the one who was ashamed. Much like Theon really, even though Theon isn't explicitly queer in this book,
Mm.
he doesn't seem to be ashamed of it because he talks to Daniel at length when they're having the noodles together in Japan.
Yeah.
I desired you as a child, you just left me.
Yeah.
Whereas Daniel
Yeah.
is the one who's actually openly gay, and he's always sort of shutting off.
That's true.
But
But even
Good
his
point.
wife leaves him, you know, so Theon's wife, because
She
she
leaves
finds
him.
the butcher and
The butcher's more virile.
Forgot about the
He's not
butcher,
sharpening
yeah.
his knives.
interesting. I mean, I had to laugh, you know, so when Theon speaks about his wife leaving him, and he said every time, because he was really very sick, had a bone, you know, sort of like cancer. He said every time mentions the meat, he said, I get very sick with the butcher.
dear. Thank you all very much for coming. Please do come and meet Claudia and discuss
That would be
Elena
amazing.
Knows and some of her other. She's also written a lot of other books, but she's wonderful. This podcast is brought to you by BookBlast. For more bookishness between episodes, visit online journal The BookBlast Diary or find us on Instagram at BookBlast Official. Thank you all for listening to this episode of the BookBlast podcast.